right, a pace is right. You are looking live at Berwyn, Pennsylvania, which is a mainline town just outside of Philadelphia. Melania Trump is about to give her first solo campaign speech. She has introduced her husband a few times, but mostly has not really been on the campaign trail too much since the controversial address that she gave at the RNC in Cleveland. Hello, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum, back here at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on America's election headquarters. Glad to have you with me today. So it is 5 days to go. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is not a lot as we head towards November the 8th. Both the candidates calling on their top surrogates to get out there and drive their message home all across the country. And that is a look at where they are right now. The Clinton campaign has dispatched President Obama, Bernie Sanders, and Chelsea Clinton. They are out and about today. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign crisscrossing those battleground states. They bump into each other sometimes. Sometimes you see both planes next to each other on the tarmac in some of these places. And Melania Trump, as we said, is in the Keystone State, hugely important to both of these candidates. So she is looking to try to shore up some support among suburban women. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is there for us live this afternoon. Hello there, Rick.
Hi, Martha. There is a crowd of several hundred passionate Donald Trump supporters inside this indoor soccer facility at the far end waiting to cheer on Donald's wife. But there's a lot of room inside. The Trump campaign clearly had been hoping for a larger turnout. That's why they set up this big monitor and speakers outside. For an overflow crowd won't be necessary. But as you mentioned, they are targeting a very specific group here, suburban women, which Trump desperately needs if he wants to win this state. Traditionally, Republicans do very well in central and western Pennsylvania. Even President Obama only won 13 of the state's 67 counties, but he still managed to win Pennsylvania because he won almost 600,000 more votes in the Philadelphia area, which is 7-1 Democratic. So that's the challenge for Donald Trump, narrowing that gap among African Americans and among women, and that's why Melania is here today to try and help her husband capture this critical swing state.
I think it's terrifically important. It's 20 electoral votes. It's a big prize. And it's one of the closest places. It's one of the places where they really could make a difference just by moving 1 or 2% of the electorate over the last few days in the election.
This afternoon, we're told that Melania will speak from the heart about her husband's leadership qualities and how he'll make the nation more prosperous and secure in her first speech since the RNC. She will touch on family, her marriage, her campaign experience, and her goals as First Lady. In a preview of her prepared remarks, she says, we need to teach our youth American values, kindness, respect, compassion, charity, understanding, and cooperation. Again, Trump needs all of the help that he can get here in Pennsylvania, and he hopes that his wife can spark more voters to the polls next Tuesday, Martha.
All right, we will see. We'll keep an eye on that, Rick. Thank you very much. So as President Obama and a slew of top Democrats hit the trail for Hillary Clinton because it's crunch time out there, the Trump campaign is turning this into more of a family affair. In the last few days, we've seen the main surrogates that we've always seen for Donald Trump. No one is a more powerful spokesperson for him, perhaps, than his children. Eric, Donald Jr., Ivanka, Tiffany, and his wife, of course, Melania Trump, who we're getting ready to hear from in just a few moments. We understand she's going to be introduced by Karen Pence, of course, the wife of Mike Pence, this afternoon in Berwyn, Pennsylvania. So they're all going to be speaking about the person that they love and support. Let's bring in Guy Benson, Fox News contributor and political editor for townhall.com. Guy, good to have you with us today.
Hey, Martha.
So a lot of people wonder why, given the gap in the women polling that we have seen, and we're going to show that number in just a moment, we haven't seen more of Melania Trump on the campaign trail.
Well, I'm not sure that she's all that comfortable on the campaign trail, but I think it's a smart move for them in these closing days with the polls tightening and Donald Trump really needing to improve, as you just alluded to, among women, particularly college-educated women, to get his wife and his daughter Ivanka out there as much as possible. I think strategically makes sense, trying to soften Trump's image a little bit, remind women that he'll be surrounded by some of these strong women who are level-headed and that sort of thing. So that's what the campaign's going for. And they're also trying to push back against sort of the star power that Hillary has on the campaign trail for her in these closing days, including her husband, the president, the current first lady, and so forth. The Trump family is sort of the Republicans' answer to that as best they can.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting in this situation to have all of these grown children who are very articulate spokespeople for Donald Trump and also Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton. Let's take a look at some of their work on the trail.
This is the first generation that we know we're handing our kids a lesser America. with less opportunity, with less hope, and it's because of politicians. It's because of politicians. So let's shake up that system. Let's drain the swamp.
Comprehensive tax reform is critical. Dramatically decreasing taxes on business.
To always continue to invest in and prove that we are stronger together.
Guy, your thoughts on how effective these young people have been for these candidates?
Well, I go back to the second debate, particularly as it pertains to Trump, Martha. There was that famous final question after a very acrimonious and at times personal debate. I think the final question from one of the town hall attendees was, can you please try to say something nice about the other person? And Mr. Trump said that Hillary Clinton's a fighter and she never quits. And what Mrs. Clinton said was, I really admire Donald Trump's children. They are really high-quality people, and that reflects on Donald. And so I think that that spoke to a sentiment that many Americans share, regardless of what they feel about Donald Trump. He's quite a piece of work, but he has managed to help parent some very well-adjusted, successful kids, and it's something that a lot of people do admire about him. So including Hillary Clinton. So putting those kids out front and center on this home stretch, I think, probably makes a pretty good deal of sense.
I mean, they are very powerful speakers and very articulate on policy as well when they come out in support of their father, Donald Trump. And I would not be at all surprised, I've said many times, to see some of these individuals pursuing political careers of their own if this does not go the way that they all planned for their father. That's them when they were clinching the nomination on the floor of the convention in Cleveland this summer. And there's the whole group. Let's take a look at the women vote right now in terms of the most recent polling. This comes in from CBS New York Times, and you can see just the enormous gap. Hillary Clinton, 50%, Donald Trump, 36%. And again, Guy, you have to wonder why Melania and Ivanka's done a ton of traveling, but not a ton of, sort of high-profile interviews and speaking engagements.
Yeah, there have been generally, overall, I would say, a dearth of female surrogates, high-profile female surrogates for Trump on the
We do have to point out that Kellyanne Conway is his campaign manager, though. The first one to manage a presidential campaign, so that's pretty striking.
That is true, but again, you just named 3 of them, and 2 of them have been more or less MIA for the last couple of weeks, or at least taking a lower profile, which was interesting as Trump was coming out and really trying to stiff-arm all these various allegations from women about sexual misconduct in the past. Having a lot of male faces defending him, I think, was maybe less effective than having females, women in his life, defending him. And that's when Melania Trump finally sat down and did a series of interviews, including with our own Ainsley Earhardt and a few other networks. I thought Melania's answers and the way that she presented that situation was vastly better than some of the service that he had received from some other people in his camp. So, and by the way, I think there's a two-pronged approach here, Martha, where you have the humanizing and the family connection in these final few days, and then also, of course, the candidate himself, and then lots of surrogates and people in the media talking about the other major element of this race, which is the FBI dual investigations into Hillary Clinton that Brett Baier reported right here from D.C. last night, a real bombshell.
All right. Yep, we're going to be talking about those quite a bit because there's some new developments on that as well. Guy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there are revelations from WikiLeaks that have raised some brand new questions about Hillary Clinton's release of her work-related emails. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry, live in Washington. So based on this new information, was Hillary Clinton being truthful when she claimed that she originally turned over all of her work-related email, Ed?
Well, Martha, based on this new release of emails, even some of her own aides inside the inner circle did not believe all the emails were turned over. Go back to March 4th, 2015. We've talked about the timeline and how critical it is. That's the same day that Trey Gowdy, the Republican who was investigating Benghazi at the time, issued a subpoena for Hillary Clinton to preserve all work emails. Same day. Jen Palmieri, her communications director, writes colleagues that Cheryl Mills was close to a deal with the State Department to release those work emails very soon. And she basically says, hope is that either state agrees to release on a timely basis or we pledge to release them ourselves in 10 days a week. Assume you all would agree, right move. Jim Margolis, their ad maven. Yes, if there was a release of the 55,000 pages, are there others that are not being released? 55,000 was the work-related. Joel Benenson says definitely. He's the chief strategist of the campaign. Definitely there are others that are not being released. Now, we know that there were personal ones not being released and that Hillary Clinton said she deleted. Remember, she said they were about yoga and whatnot. But at our March 10th news conference, a few days after this exchange, she made this promise.
I responded right away and provided all my emails that could possibly be work-related, which totaled roughly 55,000 printed pages, even though I knew that the State Department already had the vast majority of them.
And you know she said that many, many more times. All the work-related emails were turned over at the beginning. It has since been proven that not all of them were turned over, and in fact, they've come out drip, drip in various lawsuits and whatnot, Martha.
Yeah. I mean, clearly. And when that kind of summons comes down and they say they want all, they mean they want all. And then we see in these emails add this sort of picking and choosing process. So, well, maybe we should hold back the things to the president. Maybe we should hold back this, that. I mean, it's really stunning. I don't think most people would respond to a summons this way, but it clearly reveals the way that they do things behind the scenes. And it's been tough for her, clearly. So on another note, Bernie Sanders is racing around the country for her right now, but there are some pretty rough things that were said about poor Bernie Sanders in some of these emails that we're learning too, Ed.
Yeah, look, I mean, in any primary, Democrat or Republican, you're going to say things you regret later, but these email releases have certainly shown them beating up on Bernie Sanders, even though now he's out there trying to help Hillary Clinton in the final days. They've made up, and they're saying, oh, they're friends. They always got along. You remember a previous email from John Podesta saying Bernie Sanders is a doofus. Well, Joel Johnson, a longtime Democratic advisor, friend of Podesta, wrote in February, as Sanders was doing good, marked friendly advice, quote, Bernie needs to be ground to a pulp. We can't start believing our own primary BS. This is no time to run the general. Crush him as hard as you can. Other than that, hope all is well, and congrats on Nevada. So hope all is well, but let's crush him to a pulp. And, you know, they kind of did, Martha.
That's politics, right, Ed? That's the way, that's the way it looks.
Hardball.
It's pretty ugly. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
So thousands of Iraqi civilians have been running for their lives as government forces have just started entering what was ISIS-held Mosul. We are hearing from a few of those forced to leave their homes in this city at war. Stunning images when we come back. Plus, early voting poised to break records in one state, which could very well decide this election. Live in the Sunshine State when we come back. Melania coming up as well.
Vote. Okay, ready? We're going to pretend we're down. We're down. Pretend, right? We'll pretend we're down. No, we got to win. We got to win big. We got to beat her.
Trump to take the stage just outside of Philadelphia. We'll take you there live when that gets underway as the crowd continues to move in, and we wait for her to take the stage. It's a soccer hall in Berwyn, Pennsylvania, which is an area where they very much need to bring in some of those suburban female voters, and that's one of the big purposes of her visit there today. Meanwhile, early voting is underway in the swing state of Florida. 29 electoral votes on the line, a huge cache of votes available in Florida so far. Republicans are slightly outpacing Democrats in the Sunshine State. Still 4 more days, though, of early voting left before the big day. Adam Shapiro from Fox Business Network joins us live from Largo, Florida with that. Good afternoon.
And a good afternoon to you, Martha. Right, we are in essentially St. Petersburg is what most people would know. This is Pinellas County. It's part of what they call the I-4 corridor. And I want to show you some video that we shot this morning, which actually shows votes right now being counted. This happens in all 67 Florida counties. The vote-by-mail ballots are first verified by the county canvassing board. Essentially, they're looking at the signatures and the addresses to make sure these are eligible ballots. Once the verification process is completed, the secret ballot is removed from the envelope, and then it's loaded into the tabulating machine. So they're counting the election right now. Now, they don't report those numbers. The machines hold on to those numbers until Tuesday when we actually find out for whom everyone is voting. But let me give you the who has already voted statewide in Florida numbers, because this is key to who has the momentum in Florida. And as you said, Republicans already have a slight advantage over Democrats among registered voters. Here are the numbers. Statewide, about 4.8 million people have already cast a ballot. By mail, Republicans are winning this one, 75,000. 949 69,527 Republicans returning ballots already. Democrats, 874,500. Now, going to a polling station and voting early, Democrats are leading here, 63,000 roughly. Republicans, about 998,599. They've gone to vote. Democrats, 1,061,740 have gone to vote. The reason Republicans say that's good for Republicans is the Democratic turnout in early voting doesn't appear to be holding up to the levels we saw in 2012 or 2008. And Republicans see that as a good sign. Back to you.
We'll see if they're right. Adam, thank you very much. So some counties in Florida are seeing as much as 150% jumps in early voting from 2012. That includes in-person and mail-in ballots. Blaise Ingoglia is chairman of the Florida Republican Party. Blaise, welcome. Good to have you here today.
Thank you.
So take a look at those numbers, and you've heard what Adam Shapiro was just reporting. Give us your assessment of how those look for your party.
Well, those numbers are very promising for our party. We are outperforming 2012 numbers. We are up overall right now about 20,000 votes. Compare that to 2012 when we were down 60,000 votes, and that is an 80,000 vote swing. And the reason why that is important is Barack Obama carried the state in 2012 by 74,000 votes. We feel very good going into this weekend and an election day.
Talk to us about how you see the voter population evolving over the last 4 years in Florida. What's different? Do you have a higher Hispanic vote count in Florida than you did back then? We've seen growth by a lot of different groups over the course of the last 4 years. What's your read?
Well, we are a transient state. A lot of people move to Florida from other states. They are fleeing the high tax, high regulatory schemes in other states. So we're seeing growth in our state, very rapid growth. And we are seeing an increase in the Hispanic population here in the state of Florida. Down in Miami, there's a large Cuban population. Venezuelans are moving into the state. In the I-4 corridor in central Florida, around Orlando, there's more Puerto Rican descent voters there. But overall, this state is pretty overall conservative.
So in terms of the Hispanic vote and how you see it breaking down, you know, there's been obviously so much discussion about Donald Trump and the early comments that he made about Mexicans. Now that breaks down in many ways group by group in terms of what the reaction is to those kinds of comments. How do you sort of, what's your analysis of that?
Well, two things. The first thing I would say is that Hillary Clinton and her presence here, her candidacy, is not getting her base stirred up. They're really not enthusiastic, so they're not coming out to vote. You're seeing that in the African-American community. Overall, we are about 10% of all voters are African-American. In 2012, that number was 13%, so that number is very low. When it comes to Hispanic population that has already voted, yes, that is up, but those voters are switching the way they vote. Traditionally, they had voted in early voting and on election day, and now they are switching the way they vote to absentee ballots. When you look at the people who still have to vote, they are low-propensity Democrats. We feel very happy where we are right now.
All right. It's still a toss-up state in terms of most of the electoral maps. Blaise, thank you very much. Good to see you today.
You're welcome.
And on the other side of the screen, you see Karen Pence, the wife of Mike Pence. She is introducing Melania Trump. We're going to take a quick break here, and we will bring you back with Melania Trump in Berwyn, Pennsylvania, right after this.
There'll be a quiz on that later. I think Larry Sabato can bottom line it for us. He's the director for the Center of Politics at the University of Virginia. All right, it's a little hard when you rattle things off like that, Larry. But the bottom line of your crystal ball is what this week?
Yeah, I give a lot of quizzes, and there will be one for you once this segment is over. I'm just kidding. Well, the bottom line is, you know, she was once as high as 352 in the Electoral College. Now she's down to 293. And obviously she has a tenuous hold on some of those states. New Hampshire's one I'm looking at, and I have been for some time. I learned years ago, never predict what New Hampshireites are going to do, because if they hear you, they will go into the polls and do the opposite. So I barely predict New Hampshire on anything. And then Florida, which I believe is a total toss-up, could go either way easily. A breeze could put it into one camp or the other. There are some other ones that where people have contradictory opinions, like Nevada, and you can go around the country. Obviously, Donald Trump has to win some big blue state. Is it Pennsylvania? Is it Michigan? Is it Wisconsin? He's been to New Mexico. There isn't evidence that he's winning these states, but we have several days to go. Have you noticed how things change?
Yes.
So, as of today, it's not there.
If it's just a breeze, then cue the wind machines brought in by either campaign just to create that for the final few days. You brought up an interesting point, though, that you said about New Hampshire, that sometimes when people from New Hampshire hear how they are being predicted, they like to go the opposite direction. And I'm just curious, what is the overall effect of all the noise, all this poll play-by-play really having on the electorate, especially in a place like Pennsylvania where there is no early voting?
Yes, and that you just raised a critical point. No early voting in Pennsylvania. Why is it that Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, President Obama, virtually every major Democrat you can think of is converging on Philadelphia the night before the election? It's because they don't have early voting. And I think there's also a transit strike going on there right now in Philadelphia, which isn't going to help them either. So they know that that is critical. Whether they're worried or how much they're worried about losing it, obviously the high command isn't going to tell us. But you look for signals like that to tell you where it either is getting close or where a candidate is concerned about what might happen.
Talk to us about the Comey effect, because you write a little bit about it in your crystal ball and the impact it's having on Hillary Clinton. But we also have open enrollment happening this week for the country in healthcare. So I wonder how you take in the Comey effect versus other issues that have popped up over the last several days right before Election Day.
Well, they all play a role, but let's be honest. There's nothing that was as big as what the FBI director did, James Comey did last Friday. It was a bombshell. I mean, it measured on the seismographs all across the country. Voters paid attention. And I've looked at the entrails of some of these polls, and it's fascinating. In some states where Clinton was up on Thursday and Friday morning, Friday evening and Saturday, she was down. Now, she recovered in some places on Sunday and Monday. But you see the impact something like that can have, and it tends to bring in recalcitrant, reluctant partisans. Some of the Republicans who have been holding out their support from Trump. They're starting to look at the choice, and like so many other people, saying it's a binary choice. It's going to be one or the other. So we dislike Hillary Clinton more than we dislike Donald Trump, and that adds a couple of % to him in critical states.
That's we always go. I know I've talked to you about this several times, Larry, but I think it's a theme that just keeps coming up. This Quinnipiac poll several weeks ago looked at voters why they're voting for different candidates, and on the top of every list, it was because that candidate wasn't the other one, not because they like that candidate's platform. And so are we full circle, Larry, back to that, just a very simple choice for voters in the final few days?
Yes, and this is not to criticize the minor party candidates. They have every right to run and all the rest of it. But look at what's happened to them. They have fallen like rocks in the polls in individual states and nationally, the third-party candidates. What's left for everybody is that binary choice. It's either going to be President Clinton or it's going to be President Trump. And there's a phenomenon called negative partisanship. It's when you turn out to vote not really for your candidate, but against the other candidate. You dislike the other candidate so much, you're forced in that binary choice toward the remaining candidate. Boy, we've got millions and millions of people doing exactly that on both sides.
I'm just curious, Larry, as we're even talking, we're seeing more headlines crossing about the FBI. We're sorting through all of this. The stories continue to change regarding the FBI's investigation, and certainly there's an opportunity for more stories to come out. I mean, Friday is a new day. Tomorrow, anything could happen in the afternoon. And so I'm curious how fragile you see the polling in general right now. Is it something that could be easily changed, or because of the bombshell that you call the Comey announcement last week, that the ripple effects of that would be hard to top? I know, at this point anything can happen. But how do you see it? Are people, because of that announcement, in that critical time, 10 days before the election, going to be unchanged, or could another big announcement just shake everything up all over again?
Well, a really big announcement could always shake things up, but let's just assume we don't have a giant announcement. We have little bomblets instead of a bombshell. What you have in this election is a surprisingly large number of people, as I say, who've decided to vote for a negative reason, but you also have a tiny number of truly hardcore undecideds, maybe 2%. And then you can add in the percentage that the third-party candidates are getting, because they could still lose 1% or 2% or more from their totals. So you have some people that are movable. They're not movable from Trump to Clinton or Clinton to Trump. They're either from that 2% undecided, or they're in the other group of voters voting for some third-party candidate. At this point, barring a bombshell, that's pretty much it.
Comes down to turnout. I'm writing down bomblets as a potential new word, right along with scandelabra. We're alerting the dictionaries just to see if they become real words.
Good. Let's get those added in. That's something you can put on your resume. I added a new word to Webster's.
Right. That's right. I think it could happen. Bomblets. We'll watch for it. Larry, always great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This hour, just a few moments ago, from Monmouth University, that looks like it is supporting that trend as well, showing Donald Trump holding a 6-point lead over Hillary Clinton. You see the independent candidate, Evan McMullin, trailing in third place. The virtual unknown who turned the red state into a battleground is McMullin. He talked to us on Happening Now. He said his chances are still good this week, and quite frankly, we keep on saying it's anybody's game. But this is what it looks like according to Monmouth University as we get a few days closer to Election Day and Donald Trump leading in that state.
Some new information now on Obamacare and the number of people without health insurance in this country. President Obama's signature health care law has cut down on the number of uninsured since it went into effect. But a new study from the CDC suggests that pattern may be changing. Jeff Flock is in Scottsdale, Arizona with more on that. Jeff.
Kind of ground zero, John, for, well, what's wrong with Obamacare, and another day and another blow to the president's signature health care law. Indeed, a CDC study says, while you're right, 20 million people, maybe more, have insurance. That's the good part. The bad part is pretty much everyone who's got it now may be all that's going to get it. They think that only about 200,000 people have been added in the last 6 months. It used to be millions more every year. So pretty much maybe it's gone about as far as it can go at this point. It's a huge campaign issue here in Arizona. Take a look at the numbers on Arizona voters who oppose Obamacare, 53% to 40%. So Donald Trump has tried to make that an issue here. The problem with that is that most people, you know, aren't directly affected by Obamacare. If you look at just Republican voters who were asked in Arizona, what about your health care? How do you feel about it now compared to before? 50% of Republicans say, well, it's pretty much about the same. 10% say it's even better since Obamacare came on board. 39% say it's worse. It's also an important issue, John, here because many voters disagree with Donald Trump's position on big issues like the wall. For example, a vast majority of Arizona voters say don't build that wall here in this border state. They're also opposed to his policy on deporting immigrants that have come to the country and are undocumented. So big issue, Obamacare. How much of an impact it has in Arizona, yet to be seen. About 3 or 4 points up is Trump in Arizona. We'll see if that holds, John.
All right, Jeff Flock in front of one of the few rare patches of water there in Arizona. Jeff, thank you.
The Arizona Canal.
There you go.
Beautiful.
5 days to go now. The Trump and Clinton campaigns racking up frequent flyer miles as they crisscross the country in a battleground blitz. Check out the states they are hitting over the next few days. The Washington Post headline reads, "Both candidates start final push," with the paper writing, quote, "The tightness of the race, along with the multiple states poised to have a pivotal effect on the outcome, was apparent in the vast distances covered by the candidates and their surrogates, as well as the tens of millions of dollars in advertising lined up to fill the airwaves in the last days." Joining us now, Nina Easton with Fortune magazine. She's a Fox News contributor. Christopher Bedford is editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation. So a question for both of you. I'll start with you, Nina. If you were one of the two candidates, which one would you like to be right now?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think I think Donald Trump looks more calm on the stump, more happy. Momentum is in his direction. The question is whether it's going to be enough. I mean, when you do look at the electoral map, his path to 270 is, it's a narrow one, but it's been widening in the last couple of days. So I think he's feeling, you kind of see it on the stump too. He looks, he looks more relaxed, he's more disciplined, and that makes it more difficult for Hillary Clinton when he's disciplined, frankly.
Yeah. All right, Christopher, which candidate, if you wanted to win the White House, which one would you rather be right now?
So the statistics still favor Hillary Clinton, but she's in panic mode right now because she and her friendly friends in the media have been for the last few months really saying there's no shot that Donald Trump's going to win. We've got this unlocked. Don't even think about it. And now they're seeing polls tighten all across the country. I haven't seen a single poll that's going that's going for Hillary Clinton right now. It's all tightening, and she has to go into overdrive. So she has Barack Obama, who's probably her best surrogate down in Florida, and Donald Trump, he sees a chance here. He absolutely has a chance, and he's got a busy schedule. We just watched him in Florida, and then he's flying to Pennsylvania, and then he's flying to 2 events in North Carolina. So Hillary still has the advantage going in, but Donald Trump can absolutely win this.
So what are the factors that are shaping this race, Nina? I mean, there's an awful lot of talk about the 2 FBI investigations surrounding Hillary Clinton. But what else is afoot here?
Well, I think the factors shaping this race, at least from the Clinton perspective, and and if you can see like how their strategy is responding to it, are a couplefold. One is enthusiasm has dropped since that FBI blockbuster announcement or leak last Friday. So she's having trouble getting the troops out to the extent that they want, and it's sort of showing up in early voting. And the second thing is to get African Americans coming out at higher numbers. I mean, they don't expect them to be at the numbers that they were for Obama, but they still are needing to hit higher numbers. And was really interesting today to me to watch President Obama in Florida before we watched Trump here. And he was really very much speaking to the young voters. You need to get out. If you care about criminal justice and climate change and all those issues, you got to get out and vote. He was appealing to African Americans, and he was just drumming up a kind of energy and youthful enthusiasm, I think, to go out and vote, and he was really, really pushing early voting.
Christopher, give us your list, but I also want to ask you about Obamacare. Donald Trump's been hitting the failures of Obamacare, the premium spikes, and the fact that we're down to single company coverage or single company plans in many states. Is that a part of the mix here?
Yeah, and first to what Nina said, rule number 1 of coalition building is the less partners you have, the easier it is to move forward. And Barack Obama built an extremely diverse coalition of different minorities. There was always a question of whether or not Hillary Clinton, who lacks Barack Obama's charisma, could hold that together, which is why you see her deploying now frantically Obama, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, someone who she's not too fond of, to try and pull it all together. At the same time, you have the perfect storm of people's premiums, or people's insurance payments going up 25%. The poll you guys showed just a few minutes ago shows that the country is extremely dissatisfied if they're affected by Obamacare, and it's kind of a perfect storm. Add that to the FBI, add that to the disparate coalition she has to hold together. It's a perfect storm for Donald Trump in the last week.
A couple of weeks ago, Nina, she was up somewhere around 308 in the electoral vote count.
Yeah.
Now the Cook Political Report, one of many that's counting electoral votes, but it says she's down to 278. She's lost 30 electoral votes over the course of a week or 10 days.
And that's why I think we have to be careful about a lot of this polling. I mean, it's really unusual historically extremely rare for candidates to make up that much ground. Yes, yes, Trump has momentum. Yes, he's got more enthusiasm. But something could happen tomorrow. Keep in mind, we have these Friday afternoon surprises, which have hit Donald Trump with the Access Hollywood tape before they hit Hillary Clinton with the FBI investigation latest twist. So, I mean, something else could happen that changes that. So I would be careful about looking at these, polls on the day-by-day basis as opposed to looking at the overall trajectory, which, as Chris said, it does still favor Hillary Clinton, but Trump does have momentum.
But is it enough, Christopher, to put Trump over the top?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, if right now Hillary Clinton is playing on defense in places where she shouldn't have been playing on defense, places where Donald Trump had pretty much had to write off, like Virginia a few weeks, are now within 4 points. And you're right, it's rare for people to change at the last minute, to see a big difference. But what we are seeing when polls start to change this dramatically in the last 2 weeks is undecided voters coming back, and maybe Republicans who were going to sit this one out, they decided they weren't going to support their candidate, saying, holy smokes, it's close, Hillary Clinton's near the White House, those people coming back. Now, polls are basically just opinion reads. There's very few facts that back it up. But when you see things like the polls at 538 getting better and better and better every single day this week for Donald Trump, that leans well. And it's all really going to come down to who has the better turnout operation, who gets the most voters out on Tuesday. That's also something that favors Hillary Clinton. The Democrats have a better get out the vote machine. But if that can overcome the enthusiasm gap, Hillary's still got a really good chance of winning, but Donald Trump's got the perfect storm this week.
She also might have a transit strike, which could cut into her numbers in the Philadelphia area. We'll see.
Absolutely.
It'll be fascinating. Christopher Bedford, Nina Easton, thank you.
Thanks, John.
In a key battleground state, Peter Ducey live in Cleveland with that story. Peter.
John, the Sheriff's Department told us yesterday on Tuesday they're going to have a special impact unit standing by to make sure that nothing gets unruly or violent at polling places. This impact unit was also on call for this summer's RNC here in Cleveland, and it's part of the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department's community policing wing. They normally back up local police as they do surveillance or canvass neighborhoods or set up checkpoints while searching for suspects. In this case, they're going to be waiting to get a call about any people or groups that may be trying to interfere with residents trying to cast ballots. And right now, we're told the main area of concern are long lines that could grow into unruly crowds.
We are monitoring social media, and we do have folks at each polling station. So our deputies go around at the polling station, they pick up the ballots and take them down to the Board of Election. So we just beefed up our manpower because of our previous elections.
The Board of Elections here is also making a point to say their tabulation computers will be guarded by armed deputies. They're trying to minimize concerns about ballot tampering or election rigging. Meanwhile, 2 hours away in the state capital of Columbus, there's new focus on cybersecurity. A special National Guard unit is working right now to make sure no bad actors are able to get into the cyberspace that voting systems will rely on come Tuesday. A spokesman for the Secretary of State told us this morning that, quote, we are looking to use whatever resources we have at our disposal to make sure we've taken the necessary steps to keep elections secure. And the chief of the National Guard Bureau said recently that he thinks guardsmen are especially positioned, especially qualified for this kind of a task because they can go to civilian jobs in the tech industry, learn whatever the most up-to-the-minute technology is, and then go and apply it to something like this, trying to make sure that the integrity of an election remains intact. John.
Let's all hope it does. Peter Ducey, thank you.
Well, just days before the election comes news that the FBI's probe of the Clinton Foundation has taken a, quote, very high priority. That's according to Fox News sources close to the investigation. It's apparently focusing on potential pay-to-play interaction between the then Secretary of State and donors to the Clinton Foundation. Here's our legal panel: Ebony Williams, attorney and Fox News contributor; Mercedes Cohen, a criminal defense attorney and Fox News legal analyst. Great to have you both, as it seems to get more and more complicated as each hour passes by. We did get a statement from the Clinton Foundation to our Fox's Mike Emanuel. I just want to read that as it adds something new to the story. This statement reads, we're not aware of any investigation into the foundation by the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, or any United States Attorney's Office. And we have not received a subpoena from any of those agencies. Mercedes, if I was being investigated by the FBI, I hope I'm not.
Right.
Would I know about it?
Not at all. I mean, that's part of what the feds do. They have to gather the evidence. They have to gather information. They have to talk to individuals. And frankly, once they're doing the investigation, there are deals being made. They come forward to these individuals and say, look, we see these emails, or we've been told that you may have information. We'll do a deal with you. We won't prosecute you. Here's a proffer. We won't prosecute you. Give us all the information. None of that's known to the actual target of the investigation. All of that's just a groundswell of information leading up to eventually to indictment.
So read between the lines, Ebony. When you see that statement, you hear that statement, what goes through your head as a lawyer?
As a lawyer, it means nothing, as Mercedes said. Oftentimes, see, that's the very nature of the FBI. They operate, and they're very successful with the notion of secrecy. They do all of their investigation kind of in a space where they're not subject to scrutiny, and it really helps and aids the investigation. It makes sure that it's not interfered with, and then they move forward. I think it's important that we remind people, though, there are two kind of branches going on here. There's the investigative nature of the FBI. That's their job to do this research and figure out these facts. Then they kind of hand the ball off, so to speak, to the Department of Justice, and it's their job to prosecute. But they're they're linked, because if one doesn't do a good job, if the FBI has an incomplete investigation, how does the Department of Justice know whether or not to move forward with prosecution?
So, Mercedes, when you hear reports that the investigation has been ongoing for a year, involving multiple offices around the country for the FBI, what does that say to you, and who ultimately will make the call about whether or not there is a subpoena issued or an indictment?
Well, that's what a lot of the problems. There's a lot of issues going back and forth as to who's being investigated. Well, who's actually part of the investigation? Who's actually doing the investigation? So there's been, at least been recorded, that there's been this back and forth between these agencies. If there's this much, because the magnitude of the investigation is so tremendous, that they start to draw from resources around the country. That's probably what it is. If we've obviously dealt with the defense of individuals in New York. And usually you deal with the FBI local agency, because these are individuals that are in New York and they're accused of wrongdoing here in New York. But if you have so much information, you have so many tentacles, there's so much data that's needed, then you draw from your resources around the country.
Okay, so one of the things you might hear on the campaign trail, at least from the Clinton camp, and I'm just paraphrasing here, Ebony, is like, well, you know, if the reports are suggesting that the FBI has been looking into us for a year, and of course they're not admitting that there's any investigation into the Clinton Foundation. We all just read the statement, but there's been nothing. It's gone nowhere yet.
Sure.
Is that a good defense? That if the FBI has been working on this for so long and there's still nothing, is there no there?
It's a good political talking point, so that's another thing to separate. There's a political analysis and a legal analysis. Politically, fine, sure, that's a good strategic point for the campaign to go on. Legally, it means nothing, though, because, again, you know, there's very specific things they're looking for here. They're looking for actual evidence, either through interviews or emails or other forensic evidence, that shows there was actual favorable treatment to donors of the Clinton Foundation. And until all of that has been sifted through, as Mercedes said, the scope is so broad, it must all be sifted through for that conclusion to be made. So just because there's nothing yet doesn't mean anything. It's important not to cut the investigation short prematurely.
I just want to ask you sort of a generic question, because there's so many of us reading these stories that don't have a legal background.
Right.
But the sheer volume of the information, Mercedes, is very difficult just to work through. And with your legal background, I'm just wondering what stands out most to you, and then Ebony, I'm going to get your thoughts as we continue to watch this story develop over the next several days.
Just thinking about the 650,000 emails, I mean, you have to deal with search terms. So then you're dealing with such a volume of information, you have to cull it down and say, all right, we're going to need search terms. Well, maybe that's not enough. And that's a back and forth, especially as a litigator. These are some of the issues that we need to deal with. I mean, we've had cases where there are millions of documents. And so that you have to, but when you think about something like that, you're saying, well, is my scope that I'm looking into this deep enough? Am I capturing all the information? Am I speaking to the right individuals? Am I being led astray by others? It really gets very, very complicated. And the more, obviously, there's so many individuals, so many parties, different countries that are being investigated, or at least individuals from different countries. It can become...
Sounds like old-fashioned detective work. Ebony, what stands out to you?
Certainly. So two concerns. You want to make sure it's broad enough to catch any and everything that's relevant, but there's also now this kind of political consideration. We love to think of our FBI as apolitical, but unfortunately the circumstances here let us know that there is at least a political consideration that I think Americans, you know, have. We have this time clock of Tuesday lurking over us. So certainly I think that's what sticks out to me, Jenna. You know, certainly how do we measure the magnifying the scope and making sure we get everything we need, but also considering the fact that there is this election overhead.
Wow, it's fascinating. I mean, if there's one thing that's true, it's fascinating. Sure. What will happen next is a big question. Great to have you both. Thank you very much.
To elect a new president, the Wall Street Journal did an analysis looking at demographics and the American electorate. It focused on towns in the Midwest, places like Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota, where the population has become more diverse more quickly than in any other part of the country. Entitled "Places Most Unsettled by Rapid Demographic Change Are Drawn to Donald Trump," the article says tensions over immigration will likely outlive his candidacy. Among GOP voters in this year's presidential primaries, counties that diversified rapidly were more likely to vote for the New York businessman. Joining us now, Janet Adamy, one of the authors of the article. She's a news editor at the Wall Street Journal. It's a fascinating concept and somewhat counterintuitive. You think of immigration as going to the big cities, Miami, Los Angeles, Houston, New York. But you're finding that in some of the Midwestern cities, that's where the immigration issue is really exploding into the forefront.
It is, and what we found, so again, this isn't the place with the greatest number of immigrants, but we found a chunk of counties in the upper Midwest that had gone very quickly in a very short period of time, over 15 years, from being almost entirely white to having a burst of diversity. And for the most part, that was Latinos. And then what we found was we looked at that and combined it with Republican voting results in the GOP primaries. And what we found was that those places that had diversified the most rapidly among Republican voters in the primaries, they were more likely to vote for Donald Trump than in counties overall nationwide.
Does that mean that his build that wall line is resonating in those places?
This is what our reporting showed, that we went to a town called Arcadia, Wisconsin, that was 3% Latino in 2000. It's now more than 35% Latino. Huge influx of immigrants there for jobs. And when you talk to Republican voters there, people who've been in the town a long time, they said that, yes, the issue of immigration resonated in particular for them there. They're closer to it, and they have more concerns about it.
What is it? I mean, is it the jobs that is bringing them in? Is that the sole reason?
It is, and what's interesting about what this tells us about the Trump voter is that we've heard a lot over this election cycle about Trump voters in, downtrodden areas in the Rust Belt that are suffering economically, the white, non-college educated men who are flocking to them, to Trump's campaign. But interestingly, the Republicans voting in these counties are actually, these are counties where unemployment is actually lower than the national average, incomes are increasing at a faster rate. So one piece of this that we found was that these are not places that have the same kind of economic anxiety that you're finding in a lot of the other pockets of support for Trump around the country.
But the suggestion is that Hillary Clinton does best among immigrant voters, blacks, Latinos, and so forth. You're saying that in these pockets where immigration has really changed the demographics of a particular county, those places seem to be going for Donald Trump.
Well, we looked specifically at Republican voters. We wanted to know what was motivating Republican voters. So, yes, on the whole, the diversification of the country is a force that is more beneficial to Democrats. Latinos and blacks especially are more likely to vote for Democratic candidates. But when you look at the Republican voter, we wanted to isolate the Republican voter here. The Republican voters in places that had experienced these rapid waves of immigration, they were particularly drawn to the Trump candidacy. And I think that's what we find, and that's what will be, regardless of how the election turns out, how Republican voters in some of these places identify with the immigration issue, and to the extent they're motivated by it, I think that's going to be a lasting issue for the Republican electorate.
Something that will outlast the election. Janet Adamy, Wall Street Journal, thank you.
My pleasure.
And we'll be right back.